The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com. John invited his mother over for dinner. During the meal, John's mother couldn't help noticing how beautiful John's roommate was. She had long been suspicious of a relationship between John and his roommate, and this only made her more curious. After watching the two interact over the evening, she really wondered if there was more to their relationship than met the eye. Reading his mother's thoughts, John volunteered, "I know what you might be thinking, but I assure you that Carrie and I are just roommates." About a week later, Carrie came to John and said, "You know, ever since your mother came here for dinner, I have been unable to find that beautiful silver soup ladle. You don't think she did something with it, do you?" "Well, I doubt it, but I'll email her just in case." So he wrote down, "Dear Mother, I'm not saying you did or did not do anything with the soup ladle, but it's odd that it disappeared after dinner. Do you know anything about this?" Later, he received an email from his mother that read, "Dear son, I'm not saying that you do sleep with Carrie. I'm not saying that you don't. But the fact remains that if she was sleeping in her own bed, she would have found the soup ladle by now." The title of that story is "Don't Lie to Your Mother." So the title of this talk is Conscious Communication and Relationship, Working with Conflict, which I think really boils down to conscious conflict. There are a couple things I'd like to explore about this. We talk about Dharma as being our own experience of the truth. So your Dharma is your experience of truth. It's also your path, how your personal path unfolds. So we talk a lot about your personal Dharma, finding out what's most important, what's true for you, living a life that's in alignment with your own highest calling. When you practice relational Dharma, where you're actually in relationship with another person, it gets complicated if you haven't noticed. Because not only are you dealing with your own greed, aversion, and delusion, you've got the other person and their whole life as well. So I'd like to share with you a little bit about kind of the process, kind of through this lens of Buddhist psychology, and a formula that I guarantee will be very helpful. If not, as I like to say, double your misery back. It's guaranteed. The first element in relationships is to know yourself. And the second is to know the other. The third thing I'll talk about are kind of what we call skillful means. What are the skillful ways of communicating that can be the most effective? And the fourth is a little bit to talk about undertaking the training of awakening the heart and mind. So this first piece about knowing yourself is so critical. I was thinking about this and I was reminded of a time when I was running a huge nonprofit. And it was very, very complex, and as time went by, I was originally intended to be more like a university professor, kind of a teacher, fundraiser, visionary. And I had hired a COO to run the whole organization, and it didn't work out. So I ended up being the COO and the CEO. And as I used to joke, I think then our revenue was around 19 million, and our expenses were 19 million minus $2.83. So we had constant pressure to keep going. And the stress started wearing me down. And I went into my classic patterns, which was to get caught in anxiety, to kind of shut down, work harder, and kind of get in this loop of believing that if I just worked harder, I'd feel better because I'd get more done. But I internalized everything. I just carried the whole thing inside. And finally, one day, as I was looking at it, what looked like an impossible task, I said to the chair of the board, who was a good friend, it just popped out. I said, I don't think I can keep doing this. And that began a shift, just being able to communicate that. And it's an interesting thing to reflect on your classic patterns when things aren't going your way, particularly in relationship. And they tend to show up through 5 major flavors. One is we react out of anger, out of being judgmental, externalizing our frustration, our unmet need. So it comes out through kind of a lashing out, anger, judgment, blame, ill will. There was someone on retreat who was sharing in one of the circles, and we have these small groups where we share about our experience during this last week-long intensive retreat. And he was just going on and on, this wasn't working, and and this teaching is crap. And then suddenly he realized, oh, this is what I do when I'm not on retreat too. And suddenly he saw his pattern was in the experience of meditation was exactly how he lived his life. So some of us, as I like to say, are outrage waiting to happen. You may know people like that. You're just waiting to go in that direction. Another way that some of us react to stress is we disassociate. We sort of disassociate by going into planning, by going into fantasy. Another is we get triggered by worry, which turns into obsessive thinking. We get on that hamster wheel of just cycling our issues without ever really any breakthrough. But there's a quality of restlessness and unavailability that shows up when we get activated. And some of us sort of disconnect and find ourselves kind of going into a downward spiral, kind of a depressive spiral. And that's the whole category of what's called sloth and torpor. Kind of a heaviness, a density, it's just too much. So we go into that reactive pattern. And the 5th is being paralyzed by doubt. Doubting yourself, doubting your choices, and feeling this ruthless critic that kind of shuts everything down. Sometimes, of course, it's possible to experience all 5 of these at once, which I've been masterful at different times. And it's true that when any one of these 5 patterns is dominating, aversion, kind of that craving of worry, of sloth and torpor, doubt and self-criticism, when they're dominating, it's impossible to be present. When you can remember that they're weather systems, that you can actually observe them, things begin to shift. But recognizing your reactive patterns is one of the first steps in relationship. How do you classically go when things don't go your way? And when you're onto yourself, it's helpful. The trauma response, the word trauma is really the combination of 2 elements. It's feeling fear and feeling helpless. And we all experience this at different times, sometimes more intensively than others. But when you feel that soup of fear and helplessness, your system goes into self-preservation in 3 classic patterns. It goes into fight, just blindly lashing out. It goes into flight, which is disassociation, running away. Or it goes into freeze. You just sort of freeze, you sort of shut down. Recognizing that pattern can be helpful as well. The more we self-reflect, of course, the more self-aware we become. You begin to recognize the causes and conditions that have formed your character. the causes and conditions of your primary caretakers, your culture, the beliefs that you took on. Being aware of those is enormously helpful. Buddhist psychology talks of the 8 worldly winds. These are as you're walking your path, these buffeting winds that are constantly challenging you. The desire for praise and the fear of blame. The desire for gain and the fear of loss. The desire for fame and the fear of shame. And the desire for happiness and the fear of despair. These elements as well play into our relationships. To the degree that you are caught in those desires and you're caught in those fears, they will flavor your personal dharma and will guaranteed impact those you live with. So there's something about really knowing the nature of the self, to know yourself, to be aware of your causes, the conditions that have formed your character, to be aware of your habitual ways of reacting. But I also like to think of knowing the self as sort of knowing the selfless. Knowing who you are when you're not afraid. Knowing who you are when your heart is open. Knowing who you are when you're not gripped by reactivity. That's a whole different quality. A quality of availability, a quality of possibility, a quality of creativity. That capacity for wisdom, that capacity for compassion is the fuel that creates more intimacy in your life. Which leads to the second point about knowing the other. Quite often we go into reactivity and we create an other that actually doesn't really exist. I had mentioned this before, but I don't watch TV, don't really have a TV, but I stumbled into this program called 30 Days, where they take people and they throw them into a foreign situation for 30 days and they track what happens to them. So I only just saw this one episode, and it was a story of a guy named David Stacy from West Virginia, who was a Christian, a very kind of a fundamentalist Christian, who agreed, I don't know how they got him to agree, to live with a Muslim family in Michigan. So he lived with Shamil and Sadia Shakir Haque. They were practicing Sunni Muslims. And they tracked this guy who was full of judgment and saw him in his reactivity, saw them react to him, and over the course of these 30 days, to watch the softening as he began to see their goodness. As he attended prayer, he had to attend the prayers 5 times a day. He had to study the Quran, and he had to be in conversation with everyone in this community. And at the end of those 30 days, he just said, I would be honored to work or to have anyone in this community work with me. He just saw this essential goodness in these people. I have goosebumps just remembering the story. So we create these enemies, this unreal other, and if there's anyone that you have in your life that's sometimes called the difficult person, it's quite easy to imagine them as sort of this other person. And part of the training in mindfulness, I just think of as non-judgmental awareness. Cultivating non-judgmental awareness requires that we attend to the other, that we sensitize ourselves to the other. Enormously challenging when we're in conflict. When you begin to sense the causes and conditions that have formed the other's life experience, their fears, their aspirations, when you can begin to sense their unmet need, what are they wanting? What are they needing that they're not getting? What are their classic patterns? Something begins to soften. The classic story is Imagine you're walking in the woods and you see this cute little dog in the leaves. And you go over toward the dog and suddenly the dog lunges at you and tries to bite you. You jump back. Your relationship with that dog is instantly changed. But then you notice that this dog's leg is caught in a trap. Again, your relationship changes from fear to compassion. When we begin to attend to the stress and dissatisfaction and suffering in our relationships, part of the practice is to really reflect, how is your leg caught in a trap? And the other, how is their leg caught in a trap? When you begin to sensitize yourself to the other's experience, you not only develop empathy and compassion, but you also increase your bandwidth. You can begin to speak to the other in a way that they can hear you when you sense their motivations, when you sense what's most important to them. And so this leads to an inquiry into what we can call skillful means. How do you communicate with someone when there's intense conflict? There's done many different studies on communications and relationship and sensed, what are the ways that we can facilitate communication and what are the signs when a relationship is really on the rocks. And there's one word that those in the study said that when this is present, it's very hard to turn around. And the word is contempt. When you hold the other in contempt, there's a lot of work to be done. But part of when you begin to explore your relationships, what's between you and feeling free in relationship with someone, it's very important to acknowledge those walls that we have, the defenses that we have. So I was trying to think about a good example for this model, kind of a fresh example. And I think one of the things that I'm not alone in this is, even with my intention to do no harm in this life, my intention to live a compassionate, thoughtful life, something happens when I get behind the wheel of a car. There's another being that kind of takes over, and it's a lot better than it was. But you know how they say that when you're driving, that everyone slower than you is an idiot, and everyone faster than you is a maniac? That kind of comparative thing. And I've done a lot of driving in my life. I was kind of a professional driver for some years. So when someone comes a little bit too close, they need to be punished. What can I say? So I had an event with my lovely wife where someone passed and then cut in really sharp and kind of hit their brakes. And I instantly went into, that's not right. They should know that that's not right. And so I was a little close tailgating them for a while. And my wife reacted. And her reaction was in the moment and not the most skillful reaction. It was something along the lines of, what are you're going to kill me, slow down, something like that. You drive like a maniac, which instantly created a little reaction in myself, et cetera, et cetera. And so we sort of fumed there for a while, both in our separate worlds of judging and being judged. To access non-judging awareness in a relational dynamic is very hard because of our reactivity. It's been said that most of our life is spent either avoiding domination or dominating others. That's pretty much the animal world, established dominance. So we're in a self-protective world. So there are 4 questions, and this comes from nonviolent communication. And I like to think of the strategy is to reflect on 4 questions. And I'll take you through sort of how I applied it in this situation, and then I'll invite you into a little reflection. You can sort of check this out for yourself. So the first inquiry is, what exactly are we talking about? What do we both agree happened? So if my wife was to say, so when you stomped on the brakes and almost killed me when that car came by, that's not going to initiate a very healthy conversation. Because I didn't stomp on the brakes and I didn't, you know how the most dangerous argument to use in an argument is always. You always, because you're established something that you don't both agree to. And this is where wars get started. Because you haven't identified exactly what you're talking about. So in this case, as my wife kind of slowed it down, and we have fallen back on this formula many, many times because it's so reliable. So she said, when you tailgated that car, when you tailgated the car, it's like, okay, well, I wouldn't call it tailgating, but I know what you're talking about. Still a little testy. So we had established that. Okay, now we know what we're talking about. The instance of me speeding up and being a little too close to the car behind. So the next question is, what do you feel? This is a very powerful question because normally what we do is we judge and blame. You always do this. What do you feel? And so she said, when you sped up and got close to the car in front, I felt scared. I felt this jolt of real fear, like real danger. I could hear that. It was honest, and instant was like, okay, I get it. The next question, and this again is very, very powerful. This is a pretty simple example. Usually you got to really drill down into this. The next question is, it's about the unmet need. What were you hoping for? What were you wanting? And I was just hoping that we could really enjoy our time together when we're driving without conflict. Okay, I could hear that. And this leads to the 4th inquiry, which is a little nuanced. So the 4th question goes to what's called a life-affirming request. What is something that you could ask for that would be supportive? So what it isn't is, so I request you never ever do that again. It's just not going to be very effective. So generally what I find the most effective request is one of these options. Would you be willing to find a time to talk about this? Or would you be willing to talk about this right now? Or would you be willing to tell me what it was like for you? Or, this is a little dicey, a little edgy, but would you be willing to tell me what I just said so that I know that you heard me? And what that does is it sets up the possibility for real conversation, to really drill down. So what exactly happened that you both agree happened? That requires some rigor, because you've got to knock out your story, your embellishments, your sort of self-protective angle, what actually happened, the observable behavior. And then to drill down, what do you feel? I think I had shared before, as I was with a married couple who were in some conflict, and I asked him to sort of just to share his side, just sort of generally. And so he shared, he shared his side. It wasn't all that skillful, but I could feel his authenticity. He was really trying to get to it. And I was touched. I was personally touched by his authenticity. And so I turned to his partner. I said, having heard that, what do you feel? And right away she said, I feel he's an idiot. Not exactly what we're looking for here. So it's interesting to look at feelings. What are emotions? Emotions are kind of a sensation in the body with a label from the mind. But when you look at anger, there are many, many components to anger. Anger generally has a quality of hurt or disappointment, sometimes a quality of helplessness. There can be sadness. So part of the inquiry is to really drill into this. What are all those feelings? Can you name them and sense the ones that are really true? It requires some real attention. The third question of the unmet need, what were you hoping for? What were you wanting? This question, when you authentically inquire into it, can take you into a very, very vulnerable place. There was something you were wanting that didn't happen. Can you name that? And the more authentic and more vulnerable you can be, generally, the more that will resonate for the other person. They'll sense, oh, wow, I get it. You are really, really wanting to just be heard. And I get it. And then, of course, the life-affirming request. So I'd like to offer a little reflection if you'd like to try these questions on. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might bring your attention to, or just kind of take a few moments to kind of go through the files. Is there a relationship you're in that feels somewhat dissatisfying for you? If you don't have one, you can make one up, just for the purpose of the exercise. So let's take a few minutes. Someone you might feel some sense of dissatisfaction. If you need a little time, you can raise your hand if you haven't found anything quite yet. So it might be helpful for this inquiry to take a little time just to pause. And if you're a visual person, you might visualize this other person or visualize a scene where you're with them. You might or just sense what they're wearing or the quality of light, the time of day, just to help kind of bring it a little more in the here and now. You might sense anything in the auditory realms, any conversation or words or tone of voice that you associate with this person. When you reflect on the sense of dissatisfaction that you have, what would you both agree happened? What language would you use that you would both agree to? When you sense this situation, what do you feel? What emotions can you sense that arise in this relationship? And can you locate those feelings inside? In regard to this relationship, what were you hoping for? What were you wanting? What were you most wanting? And can you imagine a life-affirming request to ask this person to be willing to talk or to hear their side? And just for a few moments, if you could imagine that you were communicating to this person with a whole message of what happened, what you feel, what you were wanting, and a request. And you might take just a few more moments, just this sense, how is this other person's leg caught in a trap? What do you imagine they are feeling? What do you imagine this person is most wanting or needing or hoping for? I'd like to offer a little forgiveness prayer, which can be a helpful reflection. And first, offering forgiveness for yourself. Just reflecting on the following lines. I allow myself to be imperfect. I allow myself to make mistakes. I allow myself to be a learner, still learning life's lessons. I forgive myself, and if I cannot forgive myself now, may I forgive myself sometime in the future. And reflecting on the following words in relationship with this other person. Just as I allow myself to be imperfect, so I allow you to be imperfect. I allow you also to make mistakes. I allow you to be a learner, to still learn life's lessons. I forgive you, and if I cannot forgive you now, may I forgive you sometime in the future. And so deepening the breath, just noticing anything that may have shifted, anything present. And if you like, you can remain with your eyes closed, or you can let your eyes open. Part of the training in mindfulness, at its most esoteric level perhaps, is to learn to see the self in other and other in self, to recognize our commonality. I had a friend from Iceland who was picking up his son in daycare, his 4-year-old son, and his son was talking to these other kids, just like talking at him and pointing his finger really vigorously, and he took his son aside and said, "You don't do that. That's not polite." And a couple days later, his son had done something, and he was going, "Look, you can't do that." And suddenly he realized where his son picked it up. So we see how we affect each other in different ways. And in conflict, how we create another and we hold them apart. There is a practice of Tanglen, which is essentially remembering that whatever you feel, other people feel this too. It can be quite powerful. And it helps to open up a sensitivity to ourselves and to others, our shared collective experience here. And there are just a few pointers that the Buddha mentioned. when we feel in conflict from others, to contemplate the karma of ill will. That is to say, when you hold ill will toward another person, what is the outcome of that? If you hold on to it. He often described the practice of holding on to anger like picking up a hot coal to throw at someone and to not realize that you are the one who's being burned. So just to contemplate, if I hold on to this grudge, where will this grudge be in 10, 15 years if I hold on to it? It's helpful to contemplate the creativity and the possibility that comes from a rested mind and heart. Oftentimes in conflict, you're stressed. When you can take that backward step, just to rest and pause, oftentimes that deeply informs how we relate to each other. To contemplate the true source of your problem. And this is a powerful contemplation. It takes us back to the recognition of the Four Noble Truths that to take human form, suffering comes with the package. Not all the time, but it comes. We recognize that there is a source of that suffering. And the source is some form of clinging, of attachment, and of identification. And to contemplate the third insight, that it is possible to let go. It's possible to let go. And that there's a path and technology and practices that support that letting go. Another contemplation is to contemplate who is truly responsible. As is often said in this practice, it's not so much what's happening as how you're holding it. Because the freedom comes in how you hold your experience. And fourth, to contemplate the karma of forgiveness. What is the outcome of truly and deeply letting go? Forgiveness is not so easy. I believe I had shared it before. I did a month-long retreat where we did an hour a day of the heart training, of first for self, and then for benefactor, and then a neutral person. And the fourth week, we were invited to select someone that we kind of held as an enemy, or the difficult person. So every day for an hour, I was wishing this person well, and so forth. And in my interview, halfway through the week, my 15-minute interview with my teacher, I said, I felt cheery. I said, here's where I am with the forgiveness. I can totally forgive this person as long as I'm guaranteed he burns in hell for eternity. Which was a breakthrough for me. And what happened as I stayed with the practice, suddenly I began to be able to sense this other person's experience. Somehow I was able to role reverse. And there's something in the role reversing that is quite powerful. I could see his fear. I could see his whole self-protective mechanism. And I could see how little it really had to do with me, but his approach to life. And suddenly things begin to soften. Things begin to open up. When we can train ourselves to sense the other in self and self in other, we begin to shift our consciousness in a most powerful way. I thought I would close with a reading from Thich Nhat Hanh. It's quite a potent reading. You may be familiar with this one. That helps us to direct our attention to our true nature, to who we are beyond our conditioning, and yet who we are in relationship in this world, this quality of interbeing. So if you like, you can close your eyes. This poem is called Call Me by My True Names. Do not say that I will depart tomorrow, because even today I still arrive. Look deeply. I arrive in every second to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with wings still fragile, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, in order to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the Mayflower metamorphosing on the surface of the river. I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear pond, and I am also the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart yet not capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands, and I am the man who has to pay for his debt of blood to my people dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. In these final minutes, you might close your eyes. And sensing in this inner world, we are also interconnected. This practice can invoke a deep knowing of self, to see clearly to who you truly are, both your conditioning as well as your capacity for wisdom and compassion. To know the other, your capacity to sense, to roll reverse. Your capacity for skillful means, to reflect, to find the questions and the words that will most effectively help you to communicate from the deepest place inside. And we'll close with a very short reflection on metta, the practice of loving kindness. You might just repeat the following words. Or if the words don't resonate for you, just simply reflect on whatever words do resonate for you. May I feel happy. May I feel peace. May I feel safe from inner and outer harm. May I feel free from suffering. And as a little experiment, just choose someone who is sitting to your left or right, behind and front, and reflect on the following words. Just as I wish to feel happy, may you feel happy. And just as I wish to know peace, may you know peace. As I wish to feel safe from inner and outer harm, so may you feel safe. As I wish to feel free from suffering, may you feel free. And you might imagine in these remaining moments, offering this out to those around you, to fill this room, to include those in your inner circle. May all these beings feel free, happy, and at peace, safe. Offer it now out to all beings without discrimination. And as you offer it out like a star in the night sky in all directions, sense if you can include this breath in every cell of your body. And as you're ready, you can gently deepen the breath. And you can let your eyes open. Thank you for your kind listening. Remembering these questions, I'll send them out as a reminder in the email. Can be enormously helpful. And as my wife and I like to say when we're in conflict, the first one who does a role reverse wins. For both of us.